There is a photograph sitting on my nightstand. I've looked at it every morning for the past 3 years, a picture of me in a hospital hallway, still in my scrubs, holding a letter I hadn't opened yet. My eyes are red. My hair is falling out of its bun. I look like I haven't slept in 2 days, which, for the record, I hadn't. I never planned to keep that photo. My aunt took it without asking, the way she always does. But when I finally saw it, I understood why she didn't ask. Some moments need to be captured before the person living them talks themselves out of feeling it. I'm going to tell you what was in that letter. But first, I need to tell you how I got there. My name is Maya, and I am the daughter my parents forgot to brag about. That sounds harsh. I know it does. And for most of my life, I would have corrected myself the second I said it out loud. I would have said something like, "It wasn't that bad," or "They had a lot on their plate," or "My brother just needed more attention." I spent 28 years finding softer ways to say the same true thing. So let me just say it once, clearly, before I lose my nerve. I grew up in a house where my accomplishments were furniture noticed only when someone bumped into them, and otherwise invisible. My brother's name is Derek. He is 3 years younger than me, 6'2", and has been the center of every room he has ever walked into, since roughly the age of 4. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you'd describe weather. It's just a fact about the landscape. Derek is magnetic. He laughs loudly and remembers everyone's name, and has this way of making you feel like the conversation you're having with him is the most important one happening on Earth. My parents loved that about him. My father especially. Dad coached Derek's little league teams, drove 4 hours to watch Derek's college basketball games, and when Derek started talking about launching his own business at 23, my father didn't blink. He co-signed a $47,000 loan before Derek had even written a full business plan. I want to be precise about that number, because I know how it sounds, and I want you to understand that I'm not rounding up. Meanwhile, I put myself through nursing school on a combination of federal loans, a part-time job at a grocery store, and a scholarship I applied for 4 times before I finally got it. I ate a lot of rice and canned beans. I studied in my car during breaks because the break room at work was too loud, and my apartment had thin walls and a neighbor who played bass guitar at 11 o'clock at night. I am not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what it cost me, and I want you to understand that I paid it willingly, because I loved what I was doing. I wanted to be a nurse the way some people want to breathe. It wasn't a career choice. It was just who I was. My mother's position, when I explained any of this to her, was consistent. Maya is so independent. She doesn't need help the way Derek does. She said it proudly, like it was a compliment. Like she was describing a quality I'd been born with, rather than a skill I developed out of necessity. I graduated from nursing school and passed my boards on the first try. My parents came to graduation. That was something I want to be fair. They sat in the bleachers and they clapped when my name was called. My father took a few photos on his phone. My mother cried a little. We went to dinner at an Olive Garden afterward, and Derek talked for most of it about the marketing strategy for his business. And my parents asked him follow-up questions, and I sat there in my graduation dress eating breadsticks and thinking, this is fine, this is how it is, this is just how it is. I told myself that for a long time. I got my first job at Street Carmichael's Medical Center in Cincinnati. I worked the night shift in the cardiac unit for 2 years. I won't tell you every hard thing about those 2 years because we'd be here for a while, and that's its own story. What I will tell you is that I was good at it. Not in a proud way, in a quiet way. The kind of good that doesn't announce itself. I knew my patients. I caught things. I asked questions nobody else thought to ask. My charge nurse, a woman named Loretta, who had been at that hospital for 19 years and had the energy of someone who had seen everything twice, pulled me aside at the end of my first year and said, "You have a gift for this, Maya. Don't waste it." I didn't. I applied for the hospital's advanced practice residency, a 2-year program for nurses who wanted to specialize. It was one of the most competitive programs in the region, 23 applicants. 4 spots. I spent 4 months preparing my application. I rewrote my personal statement 11 times. I got a recommendation from Loretta, and one from a cardiologist named Dr. Ellison who had watched me work for 18 months and apparently had a lot to say about it. I did a mock interview with my aunt, who was a retired high school English teacher, and has never once let me get away with a vague answer about anything. My aunt's name is Ruth. She is my mother's older sister, and she drives a 12-year-old Honda Civic that she refuses to replace and keeps hard candy in her coat pocket at all times. She is one of the truest people I have ever met. Aunt Ruth drove 40 minutes to sit at my kitchen table and drill me on interview questions for 2 hours. She brought a legal pad. She took notes. She made me answer the same question 4 different ways until I found the clearest version of what I actually meant to say. I didn't tell my parents I was applying. Not at first. I told myself it was because I didn't want to jinx it. But if I'm honest, it was because I already knew how it would go. My mother would say, "Oh, that sounds intense. Are you sure you have time for that?" And my father would say, "That's great, honey." And then Derek would say something about his business, and that would be the rest of the conversation. The interview was on a Tuesday in March. I wore the blazer I'd bought for nursing school graduation, and I answered every question as clearly as Aunt Ruth had taught me to. And I walked out of that building into the cold, and I sat in my car, and I cried not because I thought I'd done badly, but because I'd wanted it so much for so long, and something about being so close made all the wanting come out at once. I drove to Aunt Ruth's house, and she made me tea, and I said, "I think I did okay." And she said, "You did more than okay, baby, I know you." 4 weeks later, I got the letter. They sent it by mail, which I thought was charmingly old-fashioned. It came on a Thursday. I didn't open it until I got to work because I was afraid to open it alone in my apartment. I put it in my bag and carried it around for an entire 8-hour shift, and on my lunch break I sat in the hallway outside the supply closet and I looked at my name on the envelope for a long time. That's when my aunt took the photo. She had stopped by to drop off lunch for a colleague who worked in administration. She volunteers with a hospital literacy program on Thursdays, and she came around the corner and found me sitting there, and she didn't say a word. She just took out her phone and took the picture. Then she sat down next to me on the floor in her good coat and said, "Open it." I did. I got in. I sat there in that hallway and I read the letter 3 times, and then I looked at my aunt, and she was already crying, and I started crying too. And we were 2 grown women sitting on a hospital floor crying over a piece of paper, and it was the best moment I'd had in years. I called my mother that evening. I waited until I got home, made dinner, and sat down at my kitchen table, and I told myself it would be good this time. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her about the program. I explained what it was, what it meant, that only 4 people were accepted, that this would change the trajectory of my entire career. I tried not to make my voice too eager. I tried to sound like someone sharing good news, not someone bracing for a landing. My mother said, "Oh, that's wonderful, sweetheart." Then she said, "I have to tell you, we have so much going on right now with Derek's launch event." Derek was launching his business officially, with a party, a rented venue, and what my mother described as a whole thing on the same Saturday as the program's welcome dinner for incoming residents. The welcome dinner wasn't mandatory. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't mandatory. But it was the first chance to meet the other residents and the physicians who would be supervising us, and it was important to me. I had been looking forward to it. When I said that, gently, my mother said, "Can't you just go to the dinner and come to Derek's event after?" They were in different cities. The dinner was in Cincinnati. Derek's event was in Columbus, 2.5 hours apart. I said, "Mom, they're in different cities." She said, "Well, I don't know what to tell you, Maya. We've been planning this for months." I sat with the phone against my ear for a moment, and I looked at the acceptance letter on my kitchen table, the one with my name printed on it in the hospital's official letterhead, and I thought about all the things I wanted to say: the loan, the basketball games, the Olive Garden, the breadsticks. The 11 years of Maya is so independent, she doesn't need anything. I said, "Congratulations to Derek. I'll let you get back to it." I didn't go to Derek's launch event. I went to the welcome dinner. I wore the blazer again. I sat next to a woman named Priya who would become one of my closest friends over the next 2 years, and who, when I told her this story much later, said, "Your mother said what?" with a face that made me feel briefly, completely understood. The program started. I threw myself into it. The first year was the hardest thing I had ever done professionally, and I loved every second of it. I was learning constantly. I was surrounded by people who took their work as seriously as I did. Loretta stopped me in the hallway one day and said, "I heard you're doing well up there," and I knew it was the closest thing to a standing ovation I would ever get from her, and it was enough. My family and I settled into a pattern. I called on Sundays. We talked about Derek's business, which was doing okay but not great, and about my parents' lives, and occasionally, briefly, about mine. My mother asked about my schedule. My father asked if I was eating enough. Nobody asked about the residency. I told myself it was fine. I told myself they were proud in their way. I told myself independence was a gift. I had been in the residency for almost 8 months when Dr. Ellison called me into his office and told me about the fellowship. I'm going to pause here, because I want to explain what this fellowship was, because I don't want you to miss the size of it. The Caldwell-Mercer Fellowship is a 12-month program offered jointly by 2 hospitals, one in Cincinnati, one in Edinburgh, Scotland. It's for advanced practice nurses in their first 3 years of specialized practice. You spend 6 months at each location. You do research. You work with a team that is genuinely one of the best cardiac care teams in the English-speaking world. And you come back if you choose to come back with a credential and a body of experience that will follow you for the rest of your career. Dr. Ellison said, "I want to nominate you. I think you'd be a strong candidate. I want to know if you're interested." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The application process took 3 months. Aunt Ruth, again, sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad. Priya read every draft of my research proposal and marked it up in green pen because she said red felt too aggressive. I submitted in January. I told my parents in February. By then, I'd learned to lead with information and hold my expectations loosely. I called on a Sunday. I said, "I've applied for a fellowship, international program. If I get it, I'd be in Scotland for 6 months." There was a pause. My father said, "Scotland? What about your apartment?" I said I'd sublet it. My mother said, "What does something like that pay?" I told her. My father said, "That's not very much for living abroad." I said the experience was the point. My mother said, "I just worry. It's so far away. And with Derek's business at such a critical stage, if something came up here." I said, "What would come up, Mom?" She didn't answer that. She said, "We just don't want you to be isolated over there." I got off the phone and I sat in my kitchen and I looked at the ceiling for a while. I was not angry exactly. I was something more like clear, like I had been looking through water my whole life, and something had finally settled, and I could see all the way to the bottom. I called Aunt Ruth. She picked up and I said, "They asked about the apartment." And she said, "Of course they did." And we were both quiet for a moment. She said, "You're going to get this, Maya." I said, "I don't know." She said, "I do." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I was changing a patient's telemetry leads when my pager went off with a message to come to the residency coordinator's office at my earliest convenience. I finished with my patient. I wrote my notes. I walked down the hall and knocked on the door, and when the coordinator looked up at me, she was smiling in the particular way people smile when they are trying not to smile. She said, "We just got the notification. You've been selected." I would like to tell you that I handled this with grace. I did not. I made a sound that I cannot fully describe, and then I pressed both hands over my mouth, and the coordinator laughed and said, I know. I walked back to the nursing station in a state that Priya later described as visibly haunted, but in a good way. She took one look at me and said, "You got it," and I nodded, and she yelled loud enough that 2 patients' call lights came on simultaneously. I called Aunt Ruth from the parking garage. She answered and I said, "I got it," and she started crying before I could say anything else. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I called my parents. My father answered. I told him. I explained again what the fellowship was, what it would mean, that I'd be leaving in June for Cincinnati's portion of the program, and then flying to Edinburgh in December. He said, "That's great, honey. Your mom will be happy to hear it." I said, "Is she there?" He said, "She's out with Derek. They're meeting with his new business partner. Can I have her call you back?" I said yes. She called back 4 hours later. She said, "Dad told me, that's so exciting, sweetheart." And then she said, "You know what's funny? Derek might be expanding to the UK market. You two might end up in the same time zone." I said, "Yeah, maybe." I got off the phone and I didn't cry. I think I was past the kind of pain that comes out as tears. I was in a different kind of territory by then, the kind where you just start quietly making decisions. The month before I was supposed to leave, my parents planned a going-away dinner. My mother organized it. which surprised me. She picked a restaurant, made a reservation, told Derek to come up from Columbus. I found myself cautiously, quietly hoping. I bought a new dress. Aunt Ruth offered to drive me. Derek canceled the day before. His business partner had a conflict. He sent a text that said, "So sorry, sis. Rain check when you're back. Go crush it over there," with a fist bump emoji. My parents did not reschedule. My mother said, "It's hard to get everyone together. Maybe we can do something small before you leave." The something small never got scheduled. I went to dinner with Aunt Ruth instead. We went to a Thai place she likes near her house. She ordered for both of us because she always knows what I want before I do. We talked for 3 hours. At the end of the night, she put her hand over mine on the table and she said, "I want you to promise me something." I said, "What?" She said, "I want you to go over there and let yourself be happy. Not in spite of them. Not to prove anything. Just because you earned it, and you deserve to feel it." I looked at her across the table, and I thought about the photo on my nightstand. The hallway, the letter, the red eyes and the falling down hair and all those years of telling myself it was fine. I said, "I promise." The morning I left for the airport, Aunt Ruth pulled up to my building at 5:15 a.m. She had hard candy in her coat pocket and coffee in a thermos, and she helped me get my bags into the trunk without being asked. We drove to the airport mostly in silence, the comfortable kind. My parents called when I was at the gate. My mother's voice was warm, and she told me to be safe and to call when I landed. My father said, "We're proud of you, Maya." And I held the phone and I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness, exactly. Not yet. Just the beginning of something softer than what had been there before. I said, "Thank you, Dad." I said it and I meant it, for what it was. Not for everything I'd wished it would be. Just for what it was on that morning, at that gate. I boarded the plane alone. I found my seat. I put my bag in the overhead compartment. I sat down and looked out the window at the runway. And I thought about Aunt Ruth driving home on the empty highway, and the legal pad on my kitchen table, and Loretta in the hallway saying don't waste it, and Priya with her green pen, and Dr. Ellison with his careful, quiet faith in me. I thought about every version of myself that had eaten rice and beans in a thin-walled apartment, and studied in a parking lot and rewritten a personal statement 11 times, and sat on a hospital floor crying over a letter. I thought about the promise I'd made at the Thai restaurant. The plane started to move. The city outside the window got smaller. I watched the skyline until I couldn't see it anymore. And then I opened my bag and took out my notebook and I started writing. Not because I had something to say yet. Just because I was finally, for the first time in a very long time, somewhere I had chosen entirely for myself. That's what the one-way ticket felt like. Not like leaving. Like arriving.